Jessica Mitchell sat quietly in the back of the military briefing room, her posture straight but her eyes sharp as she studied the tactical display in front of her. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a cold glow on the faces of the officers gathered around the holographic map. The air was thick with tension as the commander outlined the details of the upcoming diplomatic escort mission, emphasizing the risks involved in flying through contested airspace. Jessica's gaze narrowed when she noticed a subtle gap on the radar, a blind spot that could leave the squadron vulnerable during the mission. Raising her hand calmly, she pointed it out, explaining how a slight adjustment in the flight path could eliminate the weakness and increase their chances of success. The room fell silent as several officers turned to examine the display more closely, acknowledging the validity of her observation. Colonel Matthews gave a curt nod and a rare compliment before moving on to pilot assignments. As he read through the names, Jessica waited for her own to be called, but it never came. When she asked about her role, the commander's tone turned cold and dismissive. He said the mission was too real for her and that they needed pilots who would not hesitate when every second counted. Then he said she should let the men handle it. The words landed like a weight in Jessica's chest, but she held her composure, swallowing the sting. She nodded once tightly and accepted her assignment in the control room, a role far from the action she was trained for and ready to take. Around her, a few pilots exchanged glances, some respectful, others indifferent, but no one spoke up to challenge the decision. Despite the dismissal, Jessica's mind raced. Years of training, countless hours in simulations, and real combat experience had prepared her for moments like this. She knew her skills were on par with any of the men in the room, if not better. Still, the cold reality of being sidelined because of her gender was hard to ignore. Her fingers tapped lightly on the tablet in front of her as she reviewed the mission details over and over, determined to make the most of her role. If she couldn't fly the mission herself, she would support the pilots from the ground with every ounce of her ability. The quiet resolve in her eyes told a story of resilience and determination that no dismissal could shake. As the officers left the room, Jessica remained seated for a moment longer, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. She thought about all the times she had been passed over for critical missions, despite outperforming her peers in every measurable way. The unspoken message was clear: no matter how skilled she wasn't the right fit for this kind of mission. Yet, beneath the frustration was a quiet fire. Jessica was not someone who accepted limits quietly. Her jaw clenched just enough to show she was ready for what lay ahead, whatever it might be. The mission wasn't over for her yet. In fact, it was only just beginning. Jessica Mitchell was 32 years old and had been flying for more than a decade. She wasn't loud, didn't seek the spotlight, and rarely corrected anyone when they underestimated her. Her quiet presence made people overlook her at first, but those who flew with her never forgot her name. She wore her hair in a simple knot at the back of her head, tucked under her flight cap. Her boots were always polished, her flight suit neatly pressed, and her expression calm no matter what pressure she faced. People called her the computer, not because she lacked emotion, but because her flying was so precise it felt machine-like. Jessica didn't mind the nickname. In the air, precision meant survival, and she had learned early on that perfection was her only way forward in a world where she constantly had to prove she belonged. She grew up in a small Texas town where her father was a mechanic and her mother worked night shifts as a nurse. Her fascination with aircraft started when she was 7, watching jets streak across the sky from a blanket on her front lawn. By the time she was 12, she could identify planes by sound alone. Flight school wasn't easy, not because of the coursework, but because she was one of only 2 women in her class. She never had a mentor who looked like her. There were comments, jokes, and casual dismissals that she learned to ignore. While others celebrated passing marks, Jessica quietly broke records. She aced every simulator, adapted instantly to new aircraft, and scored higher on reflex and strategy tests than anyone else in her year. Her instructors respected her performance but rarely gave her credit in public. After graduation, her assignments always leaned toward transport and logistics. Combat roles, the missions that mattered, somehow slipped past her name. She never complained. Instead, she trained harder, flew longer, and became the best at what she did. Other pilots began to notice. Wilson, one of the more respected captains, once told her she flew like a blade, silent, sharp, and clean. It was the closest anyone had come to acknowledging her talent in words she could hold on to. Jessica never forgot where she came from. She kept a faded photo of her parents in her locker, and a flight patch from her first solo mission tucked into her flight suit pocket. These were the reminders of why she pushed so hard. She wasn't chasing medals or promotions. She just wanted to be seen for what she was. A damn good pilot. And in the unforgiving world of military aviation that was asking for more than it should have been. In off hours, she read technical manuals like novels. She ran simulations for fun. She could recall airspace protocol from memory and troubleshoot engine failure sequences in her sleep. Her dedication wasn't loud, but it was absolute. What made Jessica different wasn't just her skill. It was her mindset. She believed every mission deserved full attention no matter how routine or who was watching. While others took shortcuts or relied on instinct, Jessica relied on preparation. Her calm under pressure came not from arrogance but from hours of quiet, deliberate study. She didn't react fast because she was brave. She reacted fast because she was ready. In the locker room, her name was rarely the first to come up in conversation. But when things went wrong, when weather turned or engines faltered, people looked her way. She didn't command with volume. She commanded by knowing what to do when it mattered most. Jessica's world was made of checklists, briefings, and quiet moments before takeoff, when she steadied her breathing and reminded herself why she was here. Not to impress anyone, just to fly. And that was the part no one could take from her. Whether she was in the cockpit or in the shadows, Jessica Mitchell had earned her place in the sky. She didn't need anyone's permission to belong there. The tactical room was filled with the low hum of machines and the quiet shuffle of boots on tile. A large holographic map hovered at the front, glowing with layers of flight data and threat zones. Officers stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes locked on the red-marked airspace flashing near a contested border. Colonel Hayes, a decorated veteran with lines of stress etched into his face, stepped forward to brief the squadron. He outlined the mission escort, a trio of diplomatic aircraft through a volatile region where one wrong turn could spark an international crisis. The path was tight, the rules even tighter with no room for improvisation once they entered restricted airspace. The air in the room grew heavier as details were delivered. Rules of engagement were strict. Maintain formation. Keep all diplomatic comms open. Do not engage unless directly targeted. Jessica stood near the back tablet in hand eyes scanning every layer of the projected route. She zoomed in on a sector others had skimmed past and spotted something subtle. A dip in radar coverage near the eastern corridor, exactly where the altitude adjustment seemed most vulnerable. She raised her hand, calm and confident. Her voice was steady as she explained the radar blind spot and suggested a 3-degree course correction to maintain coverage. There was a pause as the room processed what she saw. Colonel Hayes squinted at the screen, made the adjustment, and watched the vulnerability vanish. He gave a brief nod. Good catch. Then he moved on without acknowledgement beyond that. Jessica didn't expect applause. What mattered was the fix had been made. That corridor hidden behind the numbers could have been deadly. As the squadron shifted their stance, leaning in to study the new route, tension rippled through the group. The mission was now even more precise. They would need to fly in tight formation, use altitude control as a defense layer, and communicate with absolute clarity. The diplomatic jets they would protect were light and fast but carried weight beyond steel. On board were 3 ambassadors and staff traveling to negotiate a ceasefire agreement. Their safety meant more than just mission success. It meant global consequences. Jessica took notes faster than she breathed, her mind already visualizing turns, wind drag, and threat scenarios. While the others thought about takeoff and landing, she was analyzing mid-flight vulnerabilities and calculating risk offsets. Each pilot would have to fly within 6 feet of each other for a large portion of the flight. That kind of closeness demanded not just skill, but instinct born from hours of repetition. A single mistake could mean disaster. As the colonel finished the route presentation, he reminded the team of the stakes. No deviation, no hesitation. Protocol first, instinct second. Jessica's eyes remained locked on the eastern corridor. In her mind, she flew it over and over, each time refining the angle of entry and timing of turns. She saw problems before they existed. Her suggestion may have bought them seconds, but in this mission, seconds were everything. The room grew quiet as Colonel Hayes began reading off pilot assignments. One by one, names were called, each followed by a nod or a sharp reply of acknowledgement. Jessica waited, standing perfectly still, her hands loosely at her sides. Wilson, Patel, Martinez. Even Allen, who was typically listed as a reserve, was given a slot. But her name never came. Her chest tightened, though her face remained unreadable. She stepped forward as the room began to shift, pilots gathering their gear and murmuring among themselves. With calm control, she asked the colonel if her assignment had been missed. Hayes barely looked up from his tablet. He told her she would be monitoring from the control room. When she mentioned her experience and qualifications, he cut her off with a quiet finality. "This mission is too real. Let the men handle it." Jessica didn't flinch, though the words burned. She nodded once and turned away, her steps steady and composed. Around her, a few glances flickered. Wilson's held a flicker of apology. Martinez avoided her eyes. Nobody said a word, but their silence spoke enough. They knew she deserved to be in the air. In the hallway, Jessica kept walking, the echo of boots on tile the only sound that followed her. Her mind replayed every hour logged, every simulation passed with top scores every time she was overlooked. And still, she said nothing. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. Not here. Not now. Instead, she buried it where she always had, deep behind the discipline they trained her to carry. Jessica arrived in the control room an hour before anyone else. The lights were low monitors humming softly, and every console blinked with systems waiting to be checked. She moved with quiet efficiency, running diagnostics, reviewing every element of the mission, and logging her notes with the same care she used before a flight. Her eyes scanned the radar overlays, weather patterns, and flight schedules, memorizing every shift and variable. Each threat zone, altitude shift, and communication frequency was burned into her mind. She wasn't flying today, but she would know this mission as if she were in the cockpit. As the room slowly filled with technicians and officers, Jessica kept to her station. Some nodded to her in quiet respect. Others avoided her gaze, unsure of how to act around someone who should be leading this mission, not observing it from behind a wall of glass. Out through the wide observation windows, she watched the squadron prep on the tarmac. Wilson bounced lightly on his toes, loosening his shoulders. Patel double-checked his instruments with a tight, practiced routine. Martinez tied the same red bandana around his wrist he always wore during combat flights. Jessica's eyes followed each movement, catching every small detail. When Jang skipped a stabilizer inspection, she made a mental note. If anything went wrong, she would be ready. A voice behind her broke the quiet. Major Franklin, overseeing control operations, stepped beside her and reminded her of her role. Observe only. Do not advise. Do not intervene. No matter what she sees. Jessica nodded. Her face gave nothing away. She understood what was being said and what wasn't. She returned her focus to the mission panel, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the screen. Every pilot had their task. This was hers. She would perform it with the same commitment as any other mission. Outside, the engines fired up in sequence. The convoy was preparing to roll out, diplomatic aircraft taking position behind the escort fighters. The hum in the room grew louder, voices coordinating last-minute adjustments, but Jessica remained silent. Her breathing was slow, controlled. Her hands steady. This wasn't about recognition or being seen. This was about keeping people safe. She knew the risks. She knew the stakes. And if it came down to it, she would be ready to act with or without permission. Jessica didn't need to be in the air to make a difference. She just needed to stay focused, let the others fly. She would watch every move, and she would be ready. Outside the control room windows, the squadron rolled out with crisp precision. Engines roared to life in practiced rhythm, each aircraft aligning perfectly behind the lead jet. One by one, they took off, rising into the pale morning sky with a thunder that vibrated through the glass. Jessica watched every movement with focused intensity. The convoy followed closely, the 3 diplomatic jets gleaming under the early light. On her screen, small blips moved smoothly across the radar, the formation tight and disciplined. Inside the control room, the air was calm but alert. Voices coordinated altitude shifts and comms checks. Jessica kept her eyes locked on the radar screen, already anticipating minor course corrections. 17 minutes to contested airspace. She tracked wind speeds, thermal currents, and cloud layers. Nothing felt out of place until a faint flicker appeared at the edge of their detection range. Most would have missed it. A slight flutter, barely more than static. But Jessica knew that signal. It wasn't noise. It was familiar. She watched the pattern repeat, irregular but deliberate. Her fingers hovered over the console as she narrowed in on the coordinates. The signal was moving, not drifting. It was watching. Jessica leaned toward Major Franklin and reported the anomaly. He glanced at her screen and dismissed it as atmospheric interference. Stick to monitoring. Orders were clear. She bit back her frustration. Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. That pattern wasn't random. It matched simulations she had studied in depth, stealth tracking signatures. Jessica didn't argue. She just kept watching. The pattern grew more focused, tighter, closing in like a predator adjusting its aim. On the comms, the pilot sounded relaxed. Wilson joked about Patel's over-reliance on his lucky bandana. Jessica didn't smile. Her eyes were on a second flicker, then a third. They were being targeted. Not directly. Not yet. But the system was mapping them, preparing for a strike. She tried again, her voice low but firm. She explained what she saw. The markers, the spacing, the rhythm. It all pointed to an advanced stealth targeting array. Major Franklin shut her down. He told her not to second-guess the radar tech. She was here to watch, not to lead. Jessica leaned back in her chair, her jaw tight. The signal pulsed again. Faster this time. The sky outside looked quiet, but she knew better. Something was coming, and she was the only one who saw it. The moment hit fast. Jessica's screen lit up with a solid radar lock, unmistakable and centered on the diplomatic jets. Within seconds, a new signal flared to life. Missile launch bearing straight for the convoy. The control room erupted in noise. Technicians shouted coordinates. Officers scrambled to issue conflicting orders over a dozen open channels. On the monitors, the formation cracked. Jets veered off course, breaking the tight structure that had been drilled into them. Patel rolled left too sharply, almost clipping Wilson's wing. Jiang dropped altitude and vanished from radar for a moment. Jessica's eyes didn't leave the threat. She ran calculations in her head, speed versus distance, angles versus time. No one in the sky was close enough or aligned to intercept the missile. The countermeasures on the diplomatic planes were not designed for this level of threat. At their current speed, they wouldn't outrun it. The missile locked on heat, and they were the hottest targets in the sky. She saw the impact countdown clearly. Less than a minute. None of the escorts were in position. No maneuver they tried now would matter. Jessica sat frozen for half a breath. Then she stood. Her mind had already made the call. If no one else could stop it, she would. Jessica moved before anyone could stop her. She left her station without a word, eyes locked on the exit. Voices called after her, but she didn't hear them. Her world narrowed to the path ahead. Down the corridor, her boots hit the floor in rapid rhythm. She reached the hangar doors and slammed her palm against the scanner. For a second, she feared her access had been revoked. Then the light turned green. She ran across the tarmac toward the reserve line, air thick with jet fumes and rising heat. One fighter sat prepped, canopy open, engines on standby. It wasn't hers, but it was ready. Jessica climbed the ladder in 2 swift movements. Her body slid into the seat like it belonged there. Her hands flew across the controls, skipping every unnecessary step. The cockpit came to life. Warnings flashed across the screen, but she silenced them. She bypassed protocol after protocol, forcing the jet into combat mode in half the time it should take. The radio crackled with her name. Colonel Hayes demanded she stand down. Jessica ignored it. She pulled on her helmet and sealed the cockpit. Her breathing slowed as the engine roared beneath her. The fighter lunged forward. She accelerated hard, pushing the throttle past its limits. The G-force slammed her into the seat as the aircraft lifted off in a vertical climb. Alarms blared, but she was already climbing through cloud cover. Her fingers danced over the controls, rerouting power, adjusting altitude, aligning her intercept path. On the radar, she saw the missile, a blazing line heading straight for the convoy. The command channel exploded with voices. Orders barked, threats shouted, none of it mattered. Jessica focused on her path, narrowing her vector, eyes locked on the threat. Her voice finally cut through the noise. She told the squadron to maintain altitude. She was engaging. Wilson's voice cracked through with disbelief. She didn't respond. She was too close for distractions. The missile's signal grew stronger. Her jet burned hotter than anything in the sky now. That was the plan. Every second felt stretched thin. Her body strained under pressure, the weight of the climb pressing down hard, but her grip never faltered. Jessica's heart pounded in rhythm with the engine. The missile adjusted its path, drawn to her heat signature. It was working. She made the final adjustments, locking in trajectory. Her voice was calm as she warned of countermeasures. Then she pushed forward into the path of the weapon meant for 27 lives. Jessica pushed the engines past safety limits, flooding the sky behind her with heat. The missile responded instantly, locking onto her jet with full force. She had its full attention now. Her eyes stayed fixed on the threat even as alarms screamed inside the cockpit. With one smooth movement, she deployed a tight cluster of flares and chaff a heat bloom just wide enough to confuse the missile for half a second. At the same time, she rolled sharply to the right, adjusting her angle with pinpoint precision. The missile closed the gap fast, drawn toward the brightest heat source in the sky. For a brief second, Jessica saw it out the corner of her eye, a silver streak chasing death. Then it passed her tail and vanished in a flash of white. The shockwave hit a moment later, jolting her aircraft but leaving it intact. Her systems flickered, then steadied. She exhaled slowly. Silence filled the comms. No one spoke. No one moved. Jessica adjusted her heading and returned to the flight path, slipping back into formation like she had always been there. She didn't speak, didn't celebrate. Her job wasn't finished yet. Finally, a voice came through. Wilson's rough and unsteady, asking if what just happened was real. Then a calm, measured voice followed. It was the ambassador thanking the unknown pilot who had just saved them. Jessica responded simply, "Escort resuming. Mission will continue as planned." The convoy realigned behind her. The other jets followed her lead without hesitation. No one challenged her authority now. Inside the diplomatic jet, the ambassador watched her fighter settle into position. His voice carried back over the channel, filled with emotion. He thanked her again, this time using her name. Jessica didn't respond. She didn't need to. The gesture was enough. Behind her, the sky grew quiet. The radar was clear. The threat was gone. For the rest of the mission, no one questioned orders. No one second-guessed her voice. Every move she made was echoed in perfect sync. When they reached the safe corridor, the convoy dipped their wings in silent salute. Jessica stayed steady, eyes forward, guiding them home with the same calm focus that had saved their lives. Jessica brought her jet down with a clean, controlled landing. The wheels kissed the runway like she'd practiced 1,000 times. As she taxied toward the designated area, she saw the flashing lights of military police waiting. Her heartbeat stayed steady, even as the weight of what she'd done started to settle in. Unauthorized flight, disobeyed orders, took an aircraft without clearance. It all pointed to the end of her career. She powered down the systems with methodical precision. Then she removed her helmet and opened the canopy, letting the afternoon sun hit her face. Her legs felt heavy as she climbed down the ladder. The MPs were already moving toward her, weapons holstered but posture firm. She didn't resist, didn't speak. She stood at attention and waited for Colonel Matthews. He came toward her fast, his face unreadable. His steps were sharp boots striking the pavement with purpose. Behind him, the rest of the squadron had landed and were exiting their jets. Matthews stopped in front of her, only a couple feet away. The tarmac had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. 9 seconds, that's all he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was thoughtful, almost stunned. Jessica answered with a simple "sir," unsure what else to say. He repeated it. "From the moment you left the control room to the moment that missile was neutralized, 9 seconds. He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he raised his hand in a sharp, perfect salute. Without thinking, Jessica returned the gesture. Her hand moved on instinct, but her mind struggled to understand what was happening. The same commander who had dismissed her was now saluting her in front of the entire base. One by one, the other pilots followed. Wilson, Patel, Martinez. Even Allen, who hadn't flown, stood beside them and raised his hand. They lined up on the tarmac in formation and saluted her together. No one said a word. The moment stretched long and still. Jessica lowered her hand slowly. Matthews nodded and said at ease, then told her to meet him in his office in 10 minutes. He turned and walked away. Wilson approached her, his expression full of something like awe. He told her it was the finest flying he'd ever seen. Then he thanked her, not just for the mission, for saving all of them. She gave a quiet nod, unable to find the words. The MPs looked uncertain, waiting for guidance. One finally spoke, saying they were instructed to escort her to the colonel's office. Jessica followed them back inside. Through the halls, people turned and stared. Word had spread fast. By the time she reached the office door, she was ready for whatever came next. Inside, the space was clean, organized with maps and commendations lining the walls. Matthews gestured for her to sit. She kept her posture straight, ready to accept the consequences. Instead, He said her flight had been recorded, that the ambassador had already contacted the Secretary of Defense, that her name was being passed up through the highest levels. Then he slid a document across the desk. Transfer orders. Promotion. Effective immediately. She was being named the new squadron leader. Jessica blinked. She asked if he was serious. He told her the military wasn't perfect. He wasn't perfect. But when someone does what no one else can do, it deserves recognition. She sat there for a second, absorbing it all. Matthews added that the analyst calculated the risk. Had she not acted, there would have been 27 casualties, including 3 ambassadors. She told him she didn't do it for a title. He nodded. He already knew that. As she stood to leave, he told her first mission briefing as leader was the next morning. Then he added, "Try to give us some warning next time you plan on doing the impossible." Jessica smiled for the first time that day. She gave a crisp nod and walked out the door, closing quietly behind her. Jessica arrived at the briefing room 30 minutes early. She moved with the same calm purpose she always had, but now the room felt different. It wasn't just respect. It was trust. One by one, the pilots filtered in. They took their seats without the usual banter or sideways glances. Eyes stayed focused on her, waiting for her lead. At exactly error 800, she stepped to the front of the room. The holographic map flickered to life behind her as she began walking them through the new diplomatic escort mission. Her voice was clear, steady, filled with quiet authority. She explained the route, the risks, and the contingencies. Pilots took notes without distraction. Every suggestion she offered was absorbed without challenge. Halfway through, a hand rose in the second row. It was Lieutenant Davis, a young transfer with barely a few months of flight time. Her voice shook slightly as she asked about turbulence in Sector 7 and whether the planned banking maneuver might be too much for the slower diplomatic planes. Jessica remembered being that voice, the one with the good question that got brushed aside. So she smiled. She walked over to the display and highlighted the sector, explained the risk, confirmed the concern, and offered a precise adjustment that would keep the convoy stable without compromising formation. Then she told anyone who felt unsure to speak up now, so they could run more simulations together that afternoon. Davis looked relieved. The others nodded. It was a small moment, but it mattered. After the briefing, Jessica stayed behind. She noticed Davis lingered too. As the room emptied, the young pilot approached her slowly. Davis admitted someone had told her she wasn't ready for a mission like this, that it was too real. She looked down as she said it, embarrassed. Jessica reached out and gently adjusted the flight patch on her shoulder, told her the only ground that mattered was the one she left behind at takeoff, that someone had once said the same thing to her, and she was glad she hadn't listened. Davis smiled then, not just politely, but with belief. Jessica nodded toward the simulator rooms. They headed there together side by side. 2 pilots in a world that didn't always make room for them. But this time there was no need to ask for permission. That space had already been claimed. At 15,000 feet, with nothing but precision and courage to define who belonged and who didn't. And Jessica knew now more than ever that sometimes it took just one flight, one decision, 9 seconds of undeniable truth to change everything.